This is the 15-mark question from the Cambridge iGCSE paper 2. It's one of the 3 paper 2s that were out last year, and this is slightly different to the other 2 in terms of the requirements, and this one asks for the use of procedures, whereas the other 2 didn't. They focused much more on arrays and asked you to initialize arrays at the start. So have a look at those videos that I've done for the other 2 if you haven't already. But this is the other way, I suppose, that the questions could go. So let's have a look at what they do with procedures. Okay, I'd recommend, if you're still getting to grips with pseudocode, I'd recommend having this either print it out or have it open as a separate tab so you can refer back to it. So this is everything you need for pseudocode to answer any of these questions, any of these exam questions, all on one page. I'm using the Cambridge version of pseudocode here because we're following the Cambridge iGCSE specification, but yours, if you're using a different one, will be broadly similar. So you can use this to refer to if you want. So keep this handy as we work through the question. Okay, to solve the question, or to approach the question, we'll use an overall strategy first, and then we'll pick the question apart. So the kind of overall strategy, first of all, is to read the question carefully. And I would say read it through once completely without stopping and without doing anything else. Now remember, this exam, you're not going to be writing too much. More of the time is available for thinking as opposed to writing, as if you had a history exam, or if it was, say, an English exam or whatever language, you'd be doing a lot more writing. So a lot of the times for that, in this exam, you'll have the same amount of time, but there's a lot more thinking time. So use the time for thinking. So read the question through once completely. Now, just to look at all the questions are very similar to the one in the sample paper in terms of how they're set out. So pay attention to these instructions here at the bottom. They may change a little from one exam to the next. So they're slightly different to the sample paper, and this one is slightly different to the other paper last year, but there are some broad similarities which we'll talk about. The bullet points here, these are the most important bit, because where it says write a program that meets the following requirements, those in this case, those 3 bullet points under there, that's what you're being marked against. So you have to show that you've addressed those 3 bullet points. Okay, so look for that. That's what you have to do. And when we go through this question shortly, we'll be looking at each of those bullet points. So as I say here, try to address each one, even if you have to write several separate bits of code. So let's say you start writing your program and you get to one of the bullet points, you have a little bit of trouble with that. Maybe you might just write something that you think will work. So it's almost as if you're writing a separate bit of code that will address that point. But yes, by doing that, you're still trying to access some of the marks for that bullet point. So it's a good strategy. As you tackle each part, the information at the top here, so above where it says write a program that meets the following requirements, that information will give you clarity on what you need to do. So you've obviously read it once already, and then you may then go back to it and refer to it. And again, as we work through the question together, you'll see what I do as I refer back to it. So we'll have a little bit more of a look at that shortly. And then as you're tackling each of the bullet points, it might just be helpful to add your own annotations. So these are just examples. You might think of something else that you would like to put, but you might want to look for anything that's an input, anything that's an output, anything that needs to be processed, or anything that needs to be worked out, or perhaps anything that needs to be looped or repeated. So for example, when we do this first bullet point, we notice that we have to input an account ID, input a name, input a password, so we can sort of access the account details. And part of this first bullet point is we do some processing to check that those details match the details that are stored, so we can sort of validate the person that's logging in. And then you can try and write up the annotations as your own code or pseudocode. Okay, so let's stop this one and move on. Okay, so just paying a little bit more attention to the information at the very bottom, which is underneath the bullet points that we have to address. you must use pseudocode or program code and add comments to explain how your code works. Now this is the same, this has been on every single question, so this will be on the question that you're going to get. So you have the choice of writing it in pseudocode or program code. So in this video we'll be focusing on pseudocode, but if you can understand the pseudocode, it won't be very difficult to sort of translate that into whatever programming language you wish to do. These comments are going to be vital for you accessing marks in the middle and upper mark band. So I'll give you some examples of comments and some ideas for things that you can do and how you might be able to write comments if you're a little bit unsure about what to write. All inputs and outputs must contain suitable messages. So if you're asking somebody to input the account ID, then you need to put a message on the screen telling them what to do. Also, if we do any validation, which we will, and somebody's typed something incorrectly, then we need to give them a little error message to tell them that they've done something wrong and what to do to enter the data correctly. Okay, this one's slightly different because in the other two exams from last year, in the November exam and the other summer exam, you didn't have to declare anything. So even though they show in the mark scheme they've declared everything, you didn't have to declare any arrays, constants or variables. In this one, you only need, because we're using procedures, we only need to declare any local arrays and local variables that we use. So we're going to end up using a couple of local variables, and I'll show you when we do the procedures which ones we've used and how we use them. Okay, so that's quite important. It doesn't matter if you do declare things, but if you declare it incorrectly, then it might cost you some marks. So let's not worry about doing it because we don't have to. Right, you do not need to declare and initialize the data in the global arrays account details and the variable size. So there's the array account, there's the array account details, and there's the variable size. Now, something important about these, because you're giving these in the question, and notice they're written in a different font, so they stand out. So we've got account or AC details, and size, capital S there, capital A, and a capital D and a capital A for that one. You have to write those as they're written because you have to assume they're already created. So if you're trying to access information in the account array and you don't write account as they've written it here, then you're going to get a name error, so it won't work. So you have to write these the same. Anything else that you use or create, you're free to create and use any names that you want, but the doesn't say it here, but in the mark scheme, any names you use have to be sensible identifiers for whatever it is you're trying to store. So we'll talk about those as we go through them. So we've got the bank account ID gives the index of each account holder's data held in the two arrays. For example, ID 20's details would be held in, so account ID 20, so that's almost like saying customer 20, and we have these two-dimensional arrays here, and in the two-dimensional arrays have two indexes. What we'll do quickly is to have a quick recap on two-dimensional arrays, and then we'll carry on with the question. So we've got a 2D array account and a 2D array account details. So let's just have a little look at those. So for example, a 1D array has one index, so that's why it's called a one-dimensional array. So for example, names, the names array here, Fred, Rahul and Jen, that has one index. So names 2 is Rahul. Okay, so names 1 is Fred, names 1 is Jen. We just have one index. A two-dimensional array has two indexes. So for example, this is what the account array looks like. So we have the account holder's name and it stores the account holder's password. So the array is a two-dimensional array, and a two-dimensional array is essentially an array which contains smaller arrays or sub-arrays or whatever you want to call them. To access the data in these arrays, what we do is we have two indexes. The first index identifies the sub-array. So 1 is this one here, which is Fred's data, 2 is this one, which is Kim's data, and 3 is this one, which is Angie's data. Then we have a second index which allows us to access the individual information from the subarrays. So in this subarray, 1 is Fred, the password 1 is 2. Then we've got Kim is index 1 in this subarray, and then the password 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 is 2. And then we've got Angie is index 1 in this array, and then Angie, the password Angie 1 2 3 4 is index 2. So you can see here how we access the information. So account, which is this array, we've got 2 indexes here because it's a 2D array. 1 gives us this position, which is the first sort of subarray, and then the second number is second part of the index, or second index, is the position within that first subarray. So 1 1 is Fred. What do you think account 3 2 will be? So yeah, you're absolutely correct. So 3 is the subarray that we're after, which is this one, and then 2 is the element within the subarray that we want, and that is that's our cat, hello, and that is the position of the subarray here, which is 2. Yes, and yeah, our cat's pretty good at arrays as well. Had to listen to me quite a bit going through them. Then we have the account details array, which is also a 2D array. But this time the subarrays have 3 columns. So the first one stores the balance, so this one will be the balance. The second one stores the overdraft limit, which is this one, and then the third one stores the withdrawal limit, which is this one. So we've got balance, overdraft limit, withdrawal limit, and that's the same for the next subarray and the next subarray. And exactly the same as the account one we just talked about. There's 2 indexes. The first index identifies the subarray, so we've got 1 2 and 3 again, and each subarray then in this case has another index, but we've got 3 elements or 3 bits of data. So we can say that, for example, if we wanted to access this piece of data here, it would be 1 3, or account details 1 3. And the other thing here, where we say the bank account ID gives the index of each account holder's data held in the 2 arrays. So Fred's account ID is 1 because that gives us access to Fred's username and password. It also gives us access to Fred's account details. So for example, the account ID 3 gives us access to Angie's username and password and Angie's account details. Okay, so maybe watch this back through again if it's not clear the first time, but it's helpful to visualize the arrays here that they're telling us to use, so we can then go ahead and use them. So right, I'll stop this one here and I'll move to the next slide. Okay, let's go ahead and start writing some pseudocode. So we're going to focus on these bullet points now. This is what we're going to be doing, and we're going to use the rest of the information just to help make sure we're doing the right thing. So write a program that meets the following requirements. First, we're going to check the account ID exists and the name and password entered by the account holder. So the account holder has to enter the account ID. We're going to check that it's a valid account ID. Then they're going to enter their name and password, and we're going to check that the name and password that they've entered match the name and password stored in the account array, which is this one up here, which contains the names and passwords. So that's reasonable, we can do that. So the account ID we talked about, it's the index of each account holder's data held in the 2 arrays, account and account details. So it's basically the position of the subarray which has that particular person's information. Now, to help us out here, the variable size contains the number of accounts. So when they enter account ID, let's say, I don't know, there are 3 accounts, the variable size would have to be 1, 2 or 3 to be a valid account ID. So we'll look at how we do that as well. So just a reminder, so the account 2-dimensional array will look something like this, and it contains the account holders' names and passwords. So we know the account ID will give us the position of the subarray. So if, let's say we're Fred, we'd enter 1 for the account ID. We have to check that the account ID is valid, so to be valid, it has to be 1, 2, or 3. So it's got to be within the number of account IDs that we have. So for my example, size would be 3. Okay, so we'll use that in a minute to sort of validate that. And then once we've validated the account ID, we just want to check that the name and password entered match the names and passwords stored here, and we'll use the second index here. So for example, 1, 1 is going to be Fred, and 1, 2 will be Fred's password. Okay, and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Let's just put some annotations here. So I need to do an input, an input, an input for account ID, name, and password, and then we've got some processing to do where we're going to match the information. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a message on the screen, tell them to enter the account ID, and we're going to input it. And I'm going to comment everything. Don't forget, add comments. That if you don't put comments, you're going to be languishing in one of the bottom mark bands. So we need to have comments. Okay. We'll look at the mark bands right at the end if you manage to make it that far. Okay, so we need to validate that. We need to check it exists. So it exists if it's basically, that exists if it is anything between 1 and size. So if there were 1,000, if size was 1,000, then we have an account starting at 1 and going up to 1,000. Anything else would be wrong. So we're going to use a while loop, and we're going to validate it. We're going to say while it's wrong, or in other words, while it's less than 1, which means obviously it would be 0, we can't have 0, or we can't have negative account IDs. So while it's 1, so while it's less than 1, or while it's greater than size, which is the number of accounts, it's wrong. So we're saying while it's wrong, we're going to make them re-enter it. Okay, so output a suitable message, and then they're going to input it again, and then suitable comment again, which you can read and change if you want to. With regards to the comments, I'm popping comments above sort of each new thing that I do, each new little section block of code. You can also put inline comments as well, and I will do a couple of those, but you can add as many as you want. Don't be afraid to add lots and lots of comments to help explain what you're doing. Right, so now we need to input the name and input the password. So we've done that, and again, suitable comment. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a while loop again to compare the name and password with the stored values in the account array. And the user is going to keep entering them until they're both correct. So we're going to say, whilst the name entered isn't equal to the name stored in the account array, and also whilst the password isn't the same, we're going to make them keep re-entering them basically. So let's have a look at our while loop. So whilst account ID, which they've just entered and we validated it, position 1. Yeah, so for example, let's say we entered account ID 1, so 1, 1 is going to be Fred. So whilst that is not equal to name, so hopefully we typed in Fred there, or the account ID position 2, which is Fred's password here, if we entered 1 for the account ID, so that would be 1, 2, is not equal to password. So if either of these is wrong, we're going to fail the validation, which is what we want to do. So we're going to output a suitable error message, and we're going to ask them to enter both pieces as data again, and then we'll go back up and we'll check. So we're not going to tell them which one's wrong, and we're going to keep going around and around and around until both of these are correct. So while they're both wrong, we will ask them to enter it, and we'll output a suitable message, say login success. Okay, right, let's move on to the next part. I think that addresses everything there. Okay, so we've addressed the first bullet point. Let's have a look at the second one now. Display a menu showing the 4 actions available for the account holder to choose from. We've got 1, display balance, 2, withdraw money, 3, deposit money, 4, exit. So that's nice and straightforward. So we can that's going to be an output. So I popped it an annotation there, and I'm going to put a comment which is just talking about the menu that we're creating, and I'm using 4 outputs. So you can assume that each output will be on a separate line, so it's going to look nice and neat. It's going to look a bit like the one they've got in the question here. Then I need to input that, and I'm calling it action because that's what they've called it here. It's one of the 4 actions available. I could add an inline comment here just to say that as well, so you could do that. I haven't. So what I am going to do though is I'm going to check that they've entered 1, 2, 3 or 4. So that's fairly easy to validate, and to do that, I'm going to use a while loop. So I'm going to basically say while it's less than 1 or while it's greater than 4, it's wrong, so they have to re-enter it. So while action is less than 1 or action is greater than 4, they have to, I've given them an error message, you must choose 1, 2, 3 or 4 input action. So they're stuck around this loop until they enter 1, 2, 3 or 4. Okay, so while it's wrong, while it's less than 1 or while it's greater than 4, you're stuck in this loop. Now, one of the issues we have with this is it's only this little routine here is only going to happen once, and actually the customer might want to do a couple of things, and they might want to deposit money a couple of times. So we need a way of repeating all of these. We could use the repeat until, so we could basically just indent this code and then stick a repeat at the top and say until action equals 4, which will stop the action. So 4 is exit, so when they type 4, it'll stop. But because we've kind of used while loops all the way through, and you can use either of them, you're not going to be penalized. It doesn't matter as long as it works. I'm actually going to stick to using while loops. So I'm going to say while it's not equal to 4, we're going to stick around and we're going to keep going around and around and around. But once they type 4 and we test the condition here, this loop will stop. Okay, so hopefully that one is fairly making sense. Oh, one thing we've got to do, of course, if we do use a while loop, we need to set the condition before the loop starts, because actually we're testing action here, but action doesn't have a value until they input their choice. So to force the loop to start, I'm just going to set action to 0 here. So by setting action to 0, action is not equal to 4, so we're now inside the loop. The user can enter the choice that they want. So they might want to display the balance, withdraw some money, and then they might type 4, and when we test it, it'll stop. Right, okay, so let's stop this one and then we'll move on to procedures. Okay, so this slide is just going to be a quick recap on procedures, how you use them, how you write them in pseudocode, because to actually meet the requirements of this bullet point, we have to complete each action by using a procedure. Now you could write code and you could do them without procedures, but to access the marks, we're going to need to use them. They're fairly straightforward to use, and if you've got the guide, which was kind of on the second slide of this PowerPoint, or right at the start of the video, to hand, you'll see at the bottom there's an example of how to write a procedure. But we're going to look at an example. Look at an example now. So what we're going to do is, my example is going to be entering 2 numbers, and we're going to have a very similar menu setup to the one that we had previously, where we've got 4 options. The first is add, type 2 to subtract, type 3 to divide, and then same as before, we type 4 and we exit. Okay, so while choice is not equal to 4, we're going to be doing the other things, and when they type 4, it'll stop. Now, a procedure is just a chunk of code we give a name to, so whenever we want to use it, we can just call its name and we can use it. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we call the procedure. So we're using some selection. If choice is equal to 1, then call, which is part of the pseudocode for a procedure, so we're calling the procedure. The procedure's name is add, and in brackets we put the values we want to send to the procedure. So in our question, we're going to be sending the procedure the account ID, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. But for now, I'm going to be sending the procedure num1 and num2, because that's what we want to add. To write a procedure in pseudocode, or in the Cambridge version of pseudocode, we write the word procedure. So that's quite handy, because they tell us to write a procedure in a question, and we know that to create one, we write the word procedure in capitals. That's handy. The name of the procedure is next, and then in brackets we write down the values that the procedure is going to be given, and we call these parameters. So inside, a parameter is just a value that is created inside the brackets when we set up a procedure or we define a procedure. Okay, so we put procedure, which is the name of what we're doing. We give the procedure a name, and then in the brackets we put the parameters or the values that are going to be given to the procedure. So how this will work is when we see call, so if they type 1, we run this code, so we call the add procedure, and we're going to send it whatever was typed in for num1 and whatever's typed in for num2. So we look through, so the software will look through all the procedures we've created, find the one that's called add, and then it will give it whatever we typed in for num1 will be num1, and whatever we typed in for num2 will be num2. So what do we want to do? So inside the procedure, we just indent the code. We want to add our two numbers together. Now, just coming back down to here, down the bottom, it says you only need to declare any local arrays and local variables that you use. A local array or local variable is one that's created inside a procedure. So because we've just created this variable called answer, I'm going to declare it. So there's going to be marks for doing that. So declare the name of the variable or the identifier, and then its data type. So we're adding two numbers. The two numbers are going to be whole numbers that are entered, so I'm going to call it an integer. Okay, now I'm not putting any comments on this because I want it all to fit in, but we'll look at comments after for the actual answer. Okay, and I'm going to display the answer here, and then we write end procedure to finish the procedure. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish the calls down the bottom here. So else, if choice is equal to 2, we're going to call the subtract procedure. We're going to send it the two variables, num1 and num2. Else, if choice is equal to 3, then we're going to call the divide procedure, and we're going to send it num1 and num2. And here, we're going to create the subtract procedure. So we've got subtract procedure, the name of the procedure subtract, and in the brackets we have the parameters num1 and num2. So when num1 and num2 are passed to the procedure, it will assign the first one to num1 and the second one it will assign to num2. And then it's going to be the same. We'll declare answer as an integer. Now we have to declare it inside each procedure because it will only exist while this procedure is running, and once this procedure is finished it will be deleted from memory. It won't exist any longer. So we have to re-declare it in each separate procedure. So we're going to have answer as num1 minus num2, and we're going to print the answer out. We're going to end our procedure. Then we just need to create the divide procedure, which is going to be the same again. So it's not too much to remember in terms of creating procedures. So we just write the word procedure, the name of the procedure, and then in the brackets we put the parameters, or this is the information that's going to be passed to this procedure. So we've got num1, num2 again. So similar thing, we're going to divide the numbers and we're going to end the procedure. So when we run this code, what happens is the procedures are noted, but nothing happens until you call them. So these are stored in RAM and they're ready to be used. We input the two numbers, and then we ask the user to enter their choice, and if let's say they entered I don't know, 10 for number 1 and 5 for number 2, they entered 2 to do the subtraction. So we call the subtract procedure. So we look through the RAM to find the subtract procedure, and then we pass it our two numbers. So number 1 was 10 and number 2 is 5, and 10 minus 5 is 5, so we print number 1 minus number 2 equals 5. We end the procedure, and then we come back just after the call. So we will come back around because we entered 2, so we come back around and we go back up to the top here, and we ask them to enter them again. This will keep going around until they type 4, which will obviously exit. So we'll keep going around calling the procedures, doing the maths. Okay, so that's that one there. And I know you might be thinking, well, you have to keep doing that with the same numbers, but it just made it easier to explain rather than putting the inputting numbers inside the loop, and it fitted nicely on the screen. But that's how that works. So what we'll do is I'll stop this one, and then we'll move on and we'll look at how we can implement this to address the last of these bullet points. Okay, so now we've got a handle on what procedures are. What we're going to do is we're going to address this last bullet point, and we're going to create 3 procedures to complete each of the 3 actions. So to display the balance, to withdraw some money, or to deposit some money. So we're going to go ahead and create those 3 procedures. So there's our three procedures: to display balance, withdraw money, deposit money. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create the calls for the procedures like we did before. So if action equals 1, then we want to call a procedure that's going to display the balance. So I've just decided to call it balance. You could call it whatever you want to, as long as it's sensible. So call balance, which is the name of the procedure, and then in brackets we put the value that we're going to pass to the procedure. We're going to pass it the account ID, because the account ID gives us the position of the subarray. So we'll see how we use that in a second. Let's go ahead and finish these procedure calls. So else if action equals 2, then we're going to call a procedure to withdraw some money. So we're going to call the withdraw procedure, and again we're going to pass that account ID, and then you can probably finish off this quite easily by else if action equals 3, then we're going to call the deposit procedure, and again we're going to pass it the account ID. So now we've done that, let's do the display procedure, and there's my comment for this. So we're using use the action that was input, so they've input the action. So if action is 1, we're going to call the balance procedure. To call the procedure to complete the action, we're using the account ID in here in the brackets as a parameter to send the procedure, or we might say to pass it to the procedure. We call it parameter passing, and this will allow us to process the correct customer's details, because we know the account ID is basically the particular customer's information in the subarray. So for example, Fred's was account ID 1, which was subarray 1. Okay, so if for this one we're working on the balance procedure. So the account details has 3 bits of detail for each customer. So the first piece of information is the balance. That's the one we're interested in for this particular procedure. The overdraft limit and the withdrawal limit. And the account ID will give us each particular customer's information. And then because it's a 2-dimensional array, we have a second index, 1, 2, 3, which allows us to access each of these pieces of information. So here's my comment for this. We're writing procedure, and we're using the account ID as a parameter to get the balance from the account details array. So remember, the value in the brackets here that we're passing to the procedure, we call that a parameter. So we write procedure in capitals because that's what we're doing. We give it a name, so this is going to be called balance, and then in the brackets we put the value that's being passed to it. So if action is 1, because they want to display their balance, we call the balance procedure and we pass it the account ID. So we're going to output your balance is, and all we're going to do is we're going to output from the account details array. So let's say they typed in 2, for example, for the account ID. So we're going to output the account details. It'll be account ID, which will give us the value here, for example 2, comma, and its position 1 in each of these is the balance. So let's just have a look at that. So output account details. So we're outputting from the account details array. Account ID, which gives us the first number. In this case, I said they entered 2, comma 1, which will give us the first element in this subarray, which is the balance. So if they typed in 3 for the account ID, it would be 3, comma 1. Yeah, 3, comma 1, which would be the balance for this person. Okay, and to finish that off, we just need to end the procedure. So that's the first one done. Let's have a look at the next procedure. Okay, next procedure is to withdraw money. So if the user has typed in 2, we need to call the withdraw procedure. Just a quick reminder of what the account details array looks like, because we're going to need that to help. So we've got the balance in the subarray is the first element, overdraft limit is the second element, the withdrawal limit is the third element. So if the account ID is, or AC ID is 1, that will give us this customer's details. So 1.1 would be balance, 1.2 would be overdraft limit, and 1.3 would be withdrawal limit. And the same for the other customers. Okay, so let's create our procedure. So we've got procedure, the name of the procedure, which we're going to call it withdraw, because that's what when we're calling it, that's what we put down there, so they've got to be the same. And then in the brackets here we've got our parameter, which is going to be the account ID, which will give us the position of the subarray of the particular customer's details. So because they're withdrawing money, it makes sense to ask them how much they'd like to withdraw. So we will put a suitable message on the screen and we will create a variable called withdrawal amount. Now we need to check a couple of things. First of all, we need to check what they're asking to withdraw isn't bigger than the withdrawal limit. That would make sense first of all. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say, let's remember to declare, because it's a local variable inside the procedure, we need to declare it. There will be marks for that, and again I've put a little inline comment there to tell us what it is, and it's a real number because we're dealing with money, which will have a pounds and pence, dollars and cents, etc. Okay, so if the withdrawal amount, that's the amount they entered here, is greater than account details, account ID, which is, remember, it's the parameter that we've passed to this. So we've passed the procedure, the account ID. That's just going to be a number. So let's say it was Fred again, so account ID will be 1. So 1,3 is the withdrawal limit here. So if the withdrawal amount is greater than account details, account ID, 3, which is the withdrawal limit, then we need to output a suitable error message. Amount must be less than. I'm actually going to put what their withdrawal limit is on the screen here and as part of the error message, so they know what they need to enter. Okay, so if they do enter an amount that's acceptable, so they enter an amount that's less than the withdrawal amount, we need to check then they've actually got enough money in their account to withdraw it. So what we're going to say is, we look back down here at account details. They have an overdraft limit and they have a balance. And the balance can be positive or negative, but in this case it's £250 that's positive. So that means they've got £250 plus their £200 overdraft available. So we basically just need to add these two numbers together. And this works even if they have a negative balance, because if they had I don't know, minus £100, for example, I'll use pounds as our example. If we add that to the overdraft limit, that means they have £100 available. So we just add these two numbers together. So we have a look here. So else if the withdrawal amount is greater than the account details, account ID, 1. So again, if account ID was 1, we've got 1 plus account details, account ID, 2. So we're adding 1 plus 1 2, adding these two together, which is what we said we wanted to do. So if they're asking to withdraw more than they've got available, then we'll output a message, not enough money in the account as well. So if either of these two don't pass, then what's going to happen is they're just going to go, none of the others will activate. They're going to go back to the main menu, and then they've had an error message, they know what they've done wrong, so they can try and withdraw again. But let's just come back and do, so if they pass, if neither of these conditions are met, then they've got enough money. So we can say account details, account ID 1, which is their balance, we're going to assign that account details, account ID 1 minus the withdrawal amount. So we're basically taking away the amount they want to withdraw from the amount that's here, that in the first element of the array. Okay, so that will allow them to withdraw the money. We can end our if statement, output return to main menu, and then end that procedure. Okay, and then finally I'm just going to chuck some more comments at the top here. So we're going to use a procedure to use the account ID as a parameter. Yeah, so we're passing the account ID to the procedure, and we have the parameter in the brackets here, account ID, to get to compare the amount the user wishes to withdraw with the withdrawal limit, which we've done here. And then if the amount is less than the withdrawal limit, then we're going to check they've got enough in the account to withdraw, which is what we've done here. You could add more comments to this than I've done, and as I said earlier, feel free to put in lots and lots of comments if you want to. But that's this procedure addressed, and we've just got one more to do, which is to deposit some money, which is nice and straightforward. Okay, last of the procedures is the procedure to deposit money. So we completed the other two. This is the last one. So if action equals true, then we're going to call the deposit procedure. So I've moved the code up a little bit to give us a bit of space here. If you were writing this in your answer and you were running out of space, then don't be afraid. Just maybe write the procedure to the side a little bit. You could always draw an arrow to show where it's going to go. Just focus on writing the code correctly. That's what the person marking it is going to be looking at. Okay, so we need to let's just remind ourselves of the account details array, which is what we're going to be using when we're depositing money. So we've got the subarrays are split. There are 3 elements, or 3 parts to them. The first part is the balance, second part is the overdraft limit, the third part is the withdrawal limit. So the account ID will identify the relevant customer's details, or the subarray. So the first subarray will be 1, the second subarray will be 2, the third subarray will be 3, and then within the subarrays we've got the different elements. We've got 1, 2, and 3. So 1 will be the balance. 1 for this particular customer, 1 2 will be the overdraft limit, 1 3 will be the withdrawal limit, and so on for the others. So I've got my comment here. So this is going to be a procedure to allow a deposit by passing the account ID as a parameter, and then we're going to add the amount deposited to the balance. So this is a nice and straightforward one. So we've got our procedure. So we write procedure. We call it deposit. That's what we called it down here when we're calling it. And we have a parameter which we're going to call account ID. We're going to ask them to input a deposit amount, which I'm going to declare here. And again, it's declared as a real. And I've got a little inline comment just to give the person marking it a little bit more of a hint that I know what I'm doing. We output a suitable message, and we're going to input deposit amount. And then all that remains to do is to add the deposit amount to the first element of the subarray. So remember, account details will identify the subarray, so it's going to be account details, whichever one of these it is, comma 1. So we're going to assign account details, account ID, comma 1. We're going to assign that account details, account ID, comma 1 plus the deposit amount. So that's what it's going to look like. So account details, account ID, comma 1, which will be the account ID number, which will identify the subarray, and comma 1 will be the balance, which is what we're after. And we're going to assign that, well, we're going to assign it itself added the deposit amount. So we're going to add the deposit amount to the first element in the subarray, depending on which of the account ID numbers we're after. And then I'm just saying we're returning to the main menu, and then we're going to end the procedure. Okay, and that's it. That's the program written. What we'll do next is have a little look at the mark scheme. So we'll have a look at the example answer and the mark scheme. So you can see with the example answer, we've got our menu here and our choices. They've used a case statement to do the selection, which you could have done if you want to, but generally it's not understood, or perhaps it might not have been taught. Most students will understand using the if as to do the selection rather than the case statement. So it's entirely up to you, but either is fine. It doesn't matter. You will get the same amount of marks depending on, no matter which one you've done. The other thing that they've got here is they've created a procedure to actually check the account details. But we actually did that in our code at the start. We didn't create a procedure to do that. We just asked them to input it, and we checked it there and then. you're only actually asked to write procedures for the balance, the withdrawal amount, and the deposit amount. So that's fine. So if you were looking at this code is slightly more complex than ours, because I suppose you could argue it's a perfect answer. What I've tried to do is address it so the person that wrote this would have spent hours getting this code refined and written and tested and checked. You will have however long you have in the exam, 30 minutes. So the way that I've structured the answer is how I would try to do that if I had to sit down in an exam, being given that question, a few minutes to read it, and then, you know, not that long to answer it. Okay, so yeah, so I'm perfectly happy that what we've done addresses all of these points and allows us to access the mark scheme. So there's a little bit of information there. First of all, we talked about this. In the question, they give us the names of some of the data structures. We've got account details, and size. You have to use those names, otherwise you're going to be penalised because they're saying they already exist. So to access them, we have to use the correct names. And then there's some information regarding requirements there. Check the account number and password. So we've done that, and we've used most of these: iteration, validation, selection, input, output. Display a menu, which we've done, and make a selection, which we've done. And perform action selected. Use of arrays and procedures with parameters, which we've done. So tick, 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 tick. We've done all of that. Looking at the mark scheme, let's just look at the middle band. So some programming techniques. So basically, some is more than one. And the programming techniques: selection, iteration, counting, total, input, output. So we definitely have done that. We're very safely here or here. Some of the data structures chosen are appropriate and store some of the data required. So a little bit more clarification: more than one data structure used to store data required by the scenario. So we've definitely done that. We definitely have more than one data structure that we've used to store the data required by the scenario. Okay, so we're comfortably up here, but you can see that even by trying to address each of the points in the question, and using comments, etc., sensible names, you're going to be comfortably in this middle mark band. So if we look at this mark band here for AO3, program seen with some relevant comments. So that's the importance of comments. The majority of identifiers, or the names of the variables and arrays that you create, are appropriately named. So again, that's very easy to do, and so it's very easy to get into this mark band. The solution contains parts that may be illogical, so if you don't quite get everything, don't worry, because they're expecting that. The solution contains parts that are inaccurate. Okay, so we have lines of code with some errors that logically perform the tasks given. Ignore minor syntax errors. So that's where your comments come in handy, because if your code isn't logical, but the person marking it can read your comment and then they can see what you're trying to do, you're going to plonk yourself happily in this little mark band here. And the solution meets most of the requirements. So again, by looking at those bullet points and trying to address each one, you're giving yourselves a really good chance of trying to meet the requirements. So with all of those techniques, we're in this middle mark band, and that's 4 to 6 and 3 to 4 marks. So 6 plus 4 is 10. That allows you to access at least 10 of the 15 marks. But for some of the things, you're going to be up here. So the program has been fully commented. Suitable identifiers, that's not difficult to do either. Logical order, so addressing the bullet points one after the other. And then the rest of it is just going to be down to the quality of what you've written. But by using a strategy, a method, not panicking, taking it one bullet point at a time, you're giving yourself a real chance of getting some really good marks. So if you've made this far, well done and good luck.